Your hand presses into that porch rail and it gives soft, gray, spongy like wet cardboard. $400 on weatherproof sealant gone in 3 years. 2 counties over, a barn built in 1911 still has fence rails solid enough to lean a horse against. $1, 20 minutes. Stay with me, because what proved this is sitting in a folder I'm about to open. The first time I drove out to Turnbridge, Kentucky, I wasn't hunting for wood preservation. I was hunting for a man named Ezra Whitfield, 78 years old, still running the tobacco barn his grandfather built. Ezra lived alone at the end of a gravel road, in a clapboard house whose porch boards had gone silver with age, but hadn't warped an inch. I watched him do something that made no sense to me at first. Once a year, every fall, he walked his fence line with a rag and a jug of amber oil, working it into every post the way his father had, and his father before that. No paint, no stain from town. His hands were rough, cracked at the knuckles, the hands of a man who'd spent 60 years outdoors. He moved slowly, deliberately, never skipping a post, never rushing the job the way I would have. When I asked why he bothered with something so old-fashioned when the feed store sold sealant right down the road, he just shrugged and kept working the rag into the grain. I didn't understand it until I started digging through the archives, and when I found what I found, you'll understand why this matters. Walk into any hardware store and you'll hear the same pitch. Buy this sealant, reapply every 2 to 3 years. Homeowners spend $300 to $600 annually maintaining decks, fences, and siding that still gray, crack, and rot underneath a coating that never soaked into the timber in the first place. Most modern finishes sit on top like a raincoat. They don't become part of the material. A raincoat with one tier lets water flood in everywhere at once, trapped now beneath a layer meant to keep it out. That's not sloppy manufacturing, it's the business model. A finish that lasts 30 years never gets repurchased. One that fails in 3 does. Look closer at the labels on those cans and you'll notice the language is careful. Water resistant, not waterproof. Extends the life of your wood, not prevents rot. Nobody's technically lying to you. They're just describing a product engineered around a schedule, not around your wood actually surviving the winter without cracking down the grain. But here's what Ezra's generation refused to do, and it's why his posts are still upright a century later, while pressure-treated lumber down the road is already cupping after a single decade. If this saved you a hardware store trip, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this sitting in the archives. Ezra's method is boiled linseed oil, worked into bare wood by hand, in thin coats, with real drying time between each pass. Not brushed on thick, not left pooling, wiped in, wiped off, and given a day or two before the next round. The reason comes down to plain chemistry rather than mystery. Linseed oil, pressed from flaxseed, reacts with oxygen and hardens over time, not by evaporating like water, but by polymerizing into a tough, flexible film inside the fibers themselves. Boiled oil isn't literally boiled anymore. It's treated so that reaction finishes in hours instead of weeks. Picture the wood becoming waterproof from the inside out, the same way tanning turns rawhide into leather. Stick around. This next part matters most if you already own anything wooden older than 5 years. Early agricultural extension bulletins, once handed out free through county farm offices, described this exact treatment for fence posts and barn siding, because it was cheap and required no special skill. When I asked Ezra why it worked, he skipped the chemistry entirely. Wood's thirsty, he told me. Feed it oil instead of letting it drink rainwater, and it never has a reason to rot. It doesn't peel the way a surface coat does because it isn't sitting on the surface. It rarely needs a second round for 5, 10, sometimes 20 years. And it asks for nothing beyond a rag and a pair of gloves. No sander, no sprayer, no trip to rent equipment you'll only use once. There's a reason this particular oil, and not just any cooking oil sitting in your pantry, does the job. Flax-based oil is what chemists call a drying oil, high in the specific fatty acids that grab oxygen and link together into a solid mesh. Olive oil or vegetable oil never hardens this way. It just stays greasy and eventually turns rancid. That distinction is exactly why one shows up in a kitchen and the other shows up in a woodworker's shop, and why Ezra's father would have known the difference without ever needing the word polymerize. Now, here's where most people would stop, satisfied with a fence post that no longer rots. And if you do only what I've told you so far, you'll already see the difference within a season. But there's a deeper layer to this. The part of the story that explains why this method vanished from common knowledge in the first place. Here's why nobody handed you this. It isn't a conspiracy, it's worse. 3 industries profit when you stay unaware. the coatings business built around reapplication schedules, the pressure-treated lumber trade, selling replacement boards to homeowners whose decks failed years early, and big box retailers who earn far more margin on a $40 can of stain every 3 years than on a $12 jug of oil that lasts a decade. This isn't a guess about the size of that business. Market research firm Grandview Research puts a hard number on it. The global wood coatings market was valued at roughly $11.8 billion in 2024 alone, dominated by a handful of major coatings manufacturers. That's not one company's revenue. That's an entire industry built on the assumption that your fence, your deck, and your barn siding will need buying again in a few years. Not because the wood demands it, but because the business model does. A conspiracy can be fought because someone has to sit down and plan it. A system you can't see is harder because it just feels like the way things are. The assumption that wood is simply supposed to rot, printed quietly on every can of stain nobody questions. None of this requires anyone to be a villain. A regional sales manager isn't twirling a mustache somewhere plotting your deck's failure. The system just rewards short-lived products more than long-lasting ones, and over decades, that quiet incentive shapes what gets marketed, what gets shelf space, and what quietly disappears from memory. A multi-billion-dollar market doesn't need a conspiracy to keep growing. It just needs you to never ask why a fence post from 1911 is still standing while a pressure-treated one from 10 years ago is already soft at the base. Here's everything required for under $10 total: 1 quart of boiled linseed oil found in the paint section near the wood stains, a few clean cotton rags, nitrile gloves, fine sandpaper only if the surface is already painted or sealed and needs opening up first. Pour a small amount into a shallow container, never straight from the can onto the timber. Dip your rag, wring it out, and work the oil along the grain one section at a time. Let it sit 15 minutes, then wipe away anything that hasn't absorbed. Skipping this leaves a tacky film that collects dust. Give it a full day before the next coat, and apply 2 to 3 passes on older, drier wood. One safety note worth remembering: oil-soaked rags can generate heat as they dry and have been known to combust if left bunched together. Lay them flat outdoors until fully dry, or soak them in water first. Pick a mild, dry day for this. Oil won't cure properly in damp or freezing conditions, and rain within the first few hours will wash a thin coat right back off. Early fall or late spring tends to work best, before humidity climbs and before the first hard frost. This is a single Saturday's work. By week 1, the timber darkens slightly and water beads instead of soaking in. By week 2, sun-bleached patches start to even out. By week 3, the grain feels tighter under your palm, less rough than before. By week 4, the surface feels noticeably harder, and storms that once left dark, wet patches for hours now dry within 60 minutes. In a county historical society office near Turnbridge sits a box of farm bulletins dating back to the early 1900s. Inside is a short pamphlet on fence and building upkeep, written plainly, clearly by someone who'd already lost posts to rot and didn't want his neighbors making the same mistake. Holding the brittle photocopy in my hands felt like touching a piece of a conversation that had gone quiet. This wasn't an isolated one-off pamphlet either. The actual federal bulletin behind this practice still exists in public archives today. Farmers Bulletin 2049, Preservative Treatment of Fence Posts in Farm Timbers, issued by the USDA Forest Products Laboratory, and it superseded an even earlier bulletin, Farmers Bulletin 744, on the same subject. Proof this guidance was standard, official, and handed out for free for decades before it quietly stopped being reprinted. What that proves is straightforward. This was never folk superstition. It was standard, expected practice on any working farm, taught through official channels long before the coatings industry existed at today's scale. County agents once rode circuits between farms handing out exactly this kind of guidance for free, because keeping a farmer's fence and barn standing kept the whole local economy running. Somewhere between then and now, it stopped being common knowledge, not because it stopped working, but because nobody remained who profited from teaching it. The county offices closed or shifted focus. The pamphlets went into storage boxes instead of mailboxes. And an entire generation grew up assuming wood simply wears out, never learning there was ever a choice in the matter. Maybe you think this only suits old barn timber, not the pressure-treated lumber on your deck. It suits both. Treated wood simply needs several weeks to dry out after installation before oil will actually absorb rather than sit on top and stay tacky. If you're unsure, treat one board first. Leave the rest as they are, and compare the two after a month of weather. Maybe your climate feels too different from Kentucky's, and you're wondering if this really translates to where you live. The method adjusts to the climate, not the material itself. Humid regions do better with lighter, more frequent coats, since the wood never fully dries between rains. Drier regions can go heavier and less often, since the oil has more time to cure before the next storm rolls through. Start with whichever side of your structure takes the harshest sun or the most direct rain, and let that section tell you how often you'll actually need to repeat this. Maybe a contractor, a spouse, or a neighbor has already called this old-fashioned insisting modern paint or sealant simply does the job better now. Rather than argue the point, ask them a simple question instead. How many times have they repainted that exact same fence in the past 10 years? Then treat one section with oil, leave the rest completely untouched, and let the timber settle the argument on its own terms, without another word from you. None of these objections are unreasonable, and you shouldn't feel foolish for raising them. They're the same questions Ezra's neighbors likely asked him decades ago, back when store-bought sealant was still the newer, shinier, more convenient option on the shelf. The wood answered those questions then, quietly, one dry season at a time, and it still answers them exactly the same way now. You didn't lose this knowledge by accident. It was taken one hardware shelf at a time, one glossy advertisement at a time, one generation that stopped talking to their grandparents at a time. There's a group of people out there, plenty our age, done being sold fixes for problems that never needed to exist. People who'd rather spend 20 minutes with a rag and a jug of oil than $400 replacing a deck that shouldn't have failed at all. People who'd rather ask, how did our grandparents handle this, before reaching for their wallet. That's not nostalgia. It's a refusal to keep paying for the same problem over and over when a cheaper, sturdier answer was sitting in a farm bulletin the whole time. Tell me below, what's the one piece of wood on your property you've already given up on? I want to know, because next time I'm heading back into the archives for something older still, a Depression-era trick for keeping a root cellar from flooding, pulled from a set of farm bulletins that most people alive today have never once laid eyes on. I'll see you there. Until then, take care of what your hands can still fix.